The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and this week we are joined by a very special guest, Brian Seipp, who I had the pleasure of playing on with Team America. He's been an absolute treasure and such a great sportsman player, all the above. And he's coming back from a second-place finish, losing only to the one, the only Liam VSL in the finals at the London Grand Tournament. Brian, how are you doing?
I am exhausted, mate. Real exhausted.
I can imagine. Dude, these tournaments take it out of you. I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show. People are so eager to hear about how you did well. And not only did so well, but let me tell you, this man did so well with Orks. I don't know if you guys, girls, whoever's listening, have been around the block, but Orks have not been doing well. The common consensus from most players that Orks kind of suck these days. But Brian said, no, I'm going to take them to one of the largest tournaments in the world and get second place low-key with some Big Macs. And that's pretty much what we're here to discuss. And this is a two-part conversation. In part one, we're going to talk about Brian, how he got into the game, what it's like been playing for Team America. He has also played on Team Scotland. We're going to cover those kinds of things. And then, of course, talk about his play style and Orks, taking Orks, what his Orklist does, how it operates on the tabletop. And then in part two, for those of you inclined to learn about Warhammer and really push yourselves to become your best, that's where we're going to get into the nitty gritty. We're going to talk about the tactics he used on the table, all 8, 9, 10 games of this grueling weekend, the moves he made, the plays he made, when he called the Waaagh, why he did it. I watched a couple of his games on stream personally from War Games Live, and man, it is exciting to watch. So I'm really eager to have this conversation, Brian. Patrons, you can subscribe to part two, get access to all that information, patreon.com/AOW40K. But I cannot contain my excitement. Brian, let's get it started. Tell me about how you got into Warhammer.
I've been playing Warhammer for a really long time. I started actually back in 3rd edition, and then I shifted to fantasy and all that, but I've never really played competitive. And it's the same story I'm sure you've just been told here 800,000 times, which is played it when I was a kid, went off to college, discovered other things existed in life. And then when I grew older, I got nostalgic and I came back to the game. And so for me, I ended up coming over to the UK for grad school in 2019. And when I got here, I was up in Edinburgh. I was trying to choose between I wanted a competitive outlet of some kind. So I'm either playing Magic the Gathering or I'm playing Warhammer. The Magic scene I didn't really vibe with up in Edinburgh, so I started checking out some of the local clubs for Warhammer, and there was an incredible group of guys up there at Edinburgh Lothian Gaming, ELG, and they gave me a home and a place to slot in when I was moving to a foreign country for the first time, didn't know anybody, and that was awesome. And then I started to look at some of the tournaments that were being put on by Team Scotland and Ennis Wilson. And that's kind of where I got this real competitive bug. That's when I really properly started playing competitive 40K. So maybe shortly after COVID is when I kind of got started into that scene.
That's really cool. It's you've definitely hit the nail on the head. A lot of people have had a similar trajectory. Get started playing when they were a kid, revisited it later in life, and then getting into such a welcoming community. Like, of all the people you could run into playing Warhammer, you found your way to Ennis Wilson, who we had on the show just the other week. He's also great, and the captain of Team Scotland, obviously. So, like, he's, what a guy to run into to help you along your Warhammer journey. Is that kind of how you leveraged your network to get better? Like, at some point you're just like playing Warhammer, not really knowing what you're doing, getting back into it, to now you're representing national teams, getting second place at LGT. What was that journey like?
I tried to follow initially a kind of a methodical pattern, right? So I was lucky enough to be able to afford to travel to a bunch of tournaments, and I'm even more lucky that in the UK there's an incredible tournament circuit called the UKTC, which puts on effectively super major sized events almost every single month. So I started by going to these events and ending up 2-3. And the next time my goal was to just go 3-2 and then, kind of crawl my way up the ladder. Well, it turns out when the tournament where my goal was to make 4-1, I ended up winning the Super Major as my first tournament win ever.
Wow. Your first tournament win ever was a Super Major?
Yeah.
And your goal was to go 4-1.
My goal is to go 4-1, so it kind of catapulted me up into a different space. One of my favorite stories.
That's like unheard of. I don't know if I've ever heard anyone have that kind of trajectory. What was that? Just like an anomaly? Like you got the golden run, or was there like you just outworked everybody? What was your process there?
No, I think it was just things clicked. So I had been playing orcs through all these events and getting better and better and better, and I just happened in that moment to find a list which fit well into the meta. And I do think I got a pretty decent run. I mean, I definitely beat some good players. Over the course of that run, the finals ended up being against my current teammate Boris. But I think it was definitely, there's always luck involved, and I can't, some people can trace back every single play they made in every single game. I'm not one of those people, but there's definitely some favorable things. I mean, anytime you win a big tournament, there's gonna be some luck that's involved. But in this one, I'm sure I got my fair share of it on the way to that victory. One of my favorite stories from this is anybody who knows Ennis knows that he likes to chat a lot, if you will. And so in the night before the event started, we were talking about things and maybe me trying to eventually mark or play for Team Scotland, given that I was living in Edinburgh. And he was like, "Well, you're going to have to get a heck of a lot better before you're able to be in that space." And then at the end of the tournament, he was inviting me to Team Scotland practice weekends. So
Dude, that is such a wow, like a golden shot into like a whole world of competitive Warhammer.
Yeah.
And you would just play people who are of that quality. You will get better really, really fast.
For sure.
So did you move back to America at any point? Have you been just living up in Scotland?
I was up in Scotland until about a year ago when I moved down to London, where I'm currently at. So I'm currently living in very expensive London.
Very expensive London. Well, good for you. So Scotland for grad school, London recently, and you're representing Team America on the national team. How does that work?
Well, I in the first WTC I participated in, Team Scotland. This is shortly after my my win at Leicester, that super major. Team Scotland had somebody, they already selected their team, but somebody had to drop out. And so Ennis, because I had been getting more involved and kind of playing more games, Ennis was beginning to understand, kind of see my trajectory growth as a player. He ended up inviting me to join them and play as a merc for that first year. And so, I was able to participate in that space. And as part of that, because Ennis does a podcast called Stat Check with a number of people, one of which is one of our Team America teammates and your Art of War teammate, Anthony Vanilla. He came over to kind of hang out in Scotland a couple days before everyone left for WTC, and it just so happened that he flew into Edinburgh. I lived in Edinburgh, and so we hung out for a little bit before the event and while he was in Scotland, and I just got to know him quite a bit. And since then, he's become one of my really, really good friends. And that has kind of blossomed into me realizing, once I was at the point where I felt like my skill level was sufficient to cross the bar to playing for such a prestigious team as Team USA, and also at the encouragement of Anthony, who's a vice captain for Team USA, I decided to go ahead and apply for the Stars and Stripes because that's where my heart is. I'm a patriot, and the chance to play and represent my country on the highest level was something I couldn't pass up. And it was an incredible experience trying to go through that.
That's awesome, Brian. And I had no idea that was your backstory. I've been your teammate for a year now, and we went to WTC together. We bonded. It makes you closer with people. It's a very changing experience. And to know this was your backstory, that's just really cool. I had really, truly had no idea who you were at the time of application. I had loosely heard of you, but I had no idea of you as a player or your backstory or any of that stuff. And just through the application process, I could see holy crap, this guy is very good at Warhammer and getting very good very fast. When we first played in, I don't know, October, you were good. You weren't great. And now that we're playing in July, August, getting ready for the big championship, you 20-0'd Manny Chima. You don't get to do that unless you're really good at Warhammer, right? What are we talking about?
Yeah, that was one of the major appeals of playing for something like Team USA was, even if I don't make the team, the prep that goes into it means that I'm playing practice games against the likes of you and Anthony and Sean Naden, John Lennon. These are incredible players, and I've always been a believer that, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room. And that's, so I'm always trying to fill myself and fill my room with people who are better than me, who I can learn and grow with. Because if I'm not doing that, then what are we doing?
Dude, I love your attitude and I love your approach to getting better at Warhammer. It's very pure, but it's also the correct way to do it. Like, I mean, you can see from your growth trajectory how quickly you've gone from like, what is Warhammer to like, competing at the international level is absolutely astounding. Let's talk about the difference in like scenes and culture since you've had such a diverse array of playing experiences, Scotland, England, America, and WTC. Can you just compare and contrast some of the differences? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so I think that in my experience, American players tend to be more aggressive and more comfortable with aggressive play styles, while European players tend to like to play a little more defensively and passively, which I've found means that a lot of times the top players in the U.S. that have that passive skill set tend to excel in the U.S. events, and those who have the aggressive mindset in Europe tend to excel there because it's a strategy which is less common in both those spaces.
That's so fascinating, but I think that's so accurate. Like I think of like the way I have done well in the past is playing really defensive, reactively at Warhammer, and when I go to Europe, they're just doing it right back at me. It's like fighting a mirror.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's and then the other thing I think I found is, and this is one of the things I love the most about the UKTC. So because it's such a, compared to the US, small country, you go to these events and you see 30-40% of the same people showing up to these events every single time, right? Because it's 2-hour train ride to get to them half the time from anywhere in the country. And the result of that is that you tend to have not just the top end of the tournament get better, but also the middle and the core of the tournament tends to pull each other up because they're playing against good players all the time. They're playing against the same people. And so because of that, you start to have this what I consider to be a really mature internet or a mature tournament culture where you show up at the table and you don't have to worry about explaining to your opponent that, hey, we need to slow roll dice back when that was a thing, or how to use the clock, or that we want to use a clock, or communicating with how to measure and stuff like that. And that's always really, really refreshing. That's something I like the most about the scene here.
Yeah, it just kind of grows together and evolves, since the super majors are now monthly, more or less, and it's the same people, or a large chunk of the same people. They can influence that culture and grow together. I mean, you've seen that in America on a slower scale because of the widespread nature of it all, but I could definitely see the concentrated geography of the UK really accelerates that growth of like tournament culture. Would you say like the culture recently, Brian, in the UK has gotten more cutthroat or more, I don't want to say casual, more forgiving in nature? In America, I would say the overall health of the game culture, like the people you'll run into at tournaments, has really gone up and up and up. Like we are kind of expelling the people from the community who are the problematic characters, if you will.
Yeah, I would say, I mean, there are very few people that I would consider problem people in the UK, and at least certainly within the UK TC circuit that I tend to play in, or the larger events I tend to play in. I think that's where we're kind of lucky because and I think this is generally true for 40K in general, where the absolute bleeding edge top of the line players are people like yourself and John and Vic and these players who not only are incredibly good at the game, but put sportsmanship and playing the game correctly above everything else. And that culture, that leading by example, filters down to everybody else. And I think that's really important. And we're really lucky that that's the case, because it could easily have been the case where, if those people weren't in the scene, and the people that were the bad actors were instead the people that were winning everything, that would be the culture that came about and became really toxic. So I think we're just kind of lucky that happened to work out, and really fortunate.
That is really kind to hear, Brian. Thanks so much for saying that, putting John and I in that caliber. And Vic, too, is a word member. Like, we love to lead by example, and I love that it is being perceived in a positive way and it's making a difference in the community culture. That's the best we can ask for. It's the most we can hope for.
I think that's generally true. I found for a lot of the top what I would consider to be the top teams. So I mean, obviously for Art of War, that's a core tenet you guys have. One that I love, Vanguard Tactics, code of conduct. That's something that Steve champions everywhere he goes, and is really awesome. For Ignite, the team that I'm on, it's what we care about the most. I mean, it's more important to us that somebody is a good culture fit for us than it is that they're a really good Warhammer player. I mean, obviously we want both, but if they don't make that first cut, they're not even in consideration for being eligible to join our team.
Right. No, it's the same exact way. And I think Ignite's a great example too. In Vanguard Tactics, like all of the big teams and players at the top end of the competitive spectrum all play right. There is no shadiness among those top teams. And I love that because it creates a really great trickle down effect. And it shows that this is like a serious sport and not just like a, whatever you can get from cheating each other kind of sport.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that even beyond the blatant kind of cheating, the hard cheating, if you will, the culture that gets created is one where there isn't trying to have there's not an expectation that you're trying to play the tournament or the system as well as trying to play the game itself, right? So I come from a competitive Magic background where if somebody makes a mistake and forgets like a trigger on something where they play a card and something happens and that's supposed to trigger something else, if they forget to announce that, it doesn't happen, and your opponent is looking for opportunities where they don't announce it because it's able to give them an advantage.
Right. Like more of like the executioner in the sense of like I didn't say the right thing or I didn't,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's the culture and that's how it works for Magic. But for Warhammer, it's an open face game. Knowledge isn't hidden. I mean, the only thing you don't know is what you're going to roll when you roll the dice. But everyone has access to all the same information, and so us having a culture where that information is constantly presented to people of like, oh, don't forget I can do this, or don't forget I have this, and rather than trying to see if they can fall into your trap,
right.
is important. I've always looked at it as you don't want to win a game because you had more information than your opponent. You want to win the game because you acted with better decision making with the same information.
Right, absolutely. Like I always, and when I'm coaching people or when I'm trying to instill values in the younger generations of Warhammer players, it's like, okay, you could win a game legitimately without cheating by capitalizing on the fact that your opponent forgot that you could heroic intervention or some stuff. And sure, you did a heroic intervention, but that's not going to help you get better winning like that because you didn't outplay your opponent. You didn't outthink your opponent, out-tactical your opponent. All you did was capitalize on their human nature. And then when you go to the next round and you play someone just a tiny bit better, they're not going to forget how to heroic, and you're just going to lose that game. So you're not actually progressing in the skill set of Warhammer. And it's just like not a good way to learn, nor is it a nice thing to do. It's very bad for the culture, of course.
Yeah, I mean, this happened in my top 8 game. I was playing against Admech, and my opponent, I think, was playing a little quick and just forgot that I had Burners who could Overwatch, and so he put his guys out quite aggressively. And I resolved the Overwatch, and he didn't say anything. But then afterwards, as he's continuing his movement phase, I could tell that he was quite put off by the fact that he had made that mistake. And I was like, hey man, look, if you want to take it back, it's fine. Like, just move your guys back to where they are. We don't have to do the Overwatch, right? It's totally fine if you just like, oh, I forgot about the Overwatch. Do you mind if I take that back? Like, just ask me in a moment. I'm going to say yes. And so we rewound it and gave the squad back and just continued the game from there.
Or like a great example at WTC, like these are the highest level competitive games where you're playing for more than just yourself. You're playing for your country. And I have Dominions, and Dominions react to move. And like, I would tell my opponent at the start of the game, this is WTC. Everybody knows Dominions have a reactive move. That's not hidden information. It's not a surprise. But in the moment, you're not thinking about it. So I had multiple people like walk in within 9 inches of my Dominions, and they react to move and mess their day up, get back in my transport or do something not good for them. And then they're like, oh, no, I don't want to react to, I don't want to trigger that. I'll just stand 2 inches further back and not trigger the 9-inch react move. I was like, sure, no problem. We don't even think about saying no to that. That's a human nature mistake. Like, let's let them make the tactical decision whether they want to or not, as opposed to trying to capitalize the other way. And if we can do that at the World Championships of Warhammer, essentially, in the WTC, and we can do that without even second thoughting it, like, while you're playing for more stakes and while you're playing for honor beyond yourself, I just don't see a reason why anyone can't do that anywhere. It's the wrong way to win the other way.
Yeah, 100%. A lot of these games, if you're trying to win the game, small things like that, taking advantage of small opportunities like that, where your opponent makes a mistake and you've got you, and like that, they might give you a couple percentage points on winning the game. But the macro strategy, how you execute, how you decide to approach the game, is what's going to be the main dominant factor in you winning or not. But the main dominant factor, whether your opponent has a good experience or not, are going to be those moments. So it's so just play the game in the right way. You're still going to have a really good shot at winning if you make better decisions than your opponent, and your opponent's going to have a good time.
Okay, Brian, this is the problem with getting you on the podcast, and you should have known this was happening. You and I are just going to talk all day about whatever. we got to keep this show rolling. So let's transition a little bit to orcs and your play style, and then we'll get into your honest from there. So you play orcs all through your early days getting back into Warhammer in Scotland, you had mentioned. You obviously just took orcs to LGT, but all year long, I watched you play Votann in preparation for Team America, Orcs for Team America, Thousand Suns. You ended up taking Thousand Suns to WTC. I watched you play Tau. Like, this is such a wide variety of play styles. And like, when I think of Orcs and I think of Thousand Suns, I can't tell you how different they are to me in terms of play style and approach to the game. So how do you recognize your own play style and how it impacts your ability to play the game and play to those strengths, and also balance all these different armies that want to be doing different things and taking the games at different tempos?
Well, I think for me, what I've been looking at, which army I want to play at any given time, it's been largely factored by me wanting to find armies which are going to improve what I do as a player and my skill set as a player. So I started with orcs. They didn't really have much of a shooting phase. They kind of played the game very much in the combat space, and I became quite good at that. But then I was looking, well, what do I want my next army to be? And that's where my second army ended up being Tau, because it is the exact opposite of that, right? It is completely shooting phase oriented. But because of the fact that I played orcs so much, I tended to play Tau quite aggressively, and I was charging a lot with my Tau and being quite aggressive with them while building up the skill set of being good at shooting, but kind of approaching it from two ends with these two main armies. And then it kind of got to the point where with T-Suns, it was I wanted to start that army up because I wanted to get better at playing a game where I had to really think out exactly what all the steps are going to be, and just not just this turn, not just the next, but the one after that. Kind of really come up with this macro strategy that's going to be applied to over the course of the entire game, managing resources and really kind of fragile things, which are really powerful, but are also very, very easy to kill. And so, just every time I pick up a faction or an army, it tends to be one which I feel like is going to help me improve what I consider to be a gap in my overall ability. And as a result of doing that, now I'm able to pick up most armies fairly quickly and give it a pretty good earnest go if I were to play it at an event or in practice, and get some pretty decent results out of it. And obviously, the more I shift into teams, the more it's about filling gaps in what armies are available among the players on that team. So for Team USA, it was a lot of playing T-Suns because we didn't have very many wizards, and for Votann, we didn't have very many dwarves, so I became a dwarven wizard, and tried to play as many games as I could to try and give Team USA as many options as possible and give myself the best chance to be valuable to the team.
I think that's a great approach to do it. If you are on a team, try to find the gaps. I mean, I did that similarly with Sisters. I was like, no one's really playing Sisters, and they turned out to be one of the strongest factions. Worked out, but for your army and your playstyle, like, definitely, I love the way you can pick an army that does something that you're not necessarily good at and then try to learn it as a way to improve your skill set. Like, not only is that directly trying to tackle a new thing to learn, but it also gives you a totally different perspective and way to think about that game. It does make switching armies and filling those gaps a lot easier over time, but it probably also directly attributes to your ability to counterplay against those armies and understand what different strategies are trying to accomplish. Would you say that's benefited you, like, on the table as well, even when you're not playing those factions or even against those factions?
Absolutely. One of the things that I found by kind of playing these very diverse factions and these diverse styles is that allows me to not only kind of realize what a macro strategy for a predominantly shooting army or combat army is going to be trying to do, and also what the strategies that are effective against them, because it's what people apply against me and is effective against me. But one of the other things that allows you to do is realize that a lot of the armies that you play against, you can abstract away a lot of their rules, a lot of their interactions. So, for example, if I'm playing against a shooting army, and I have an army like orcs, a lot of times, a lot of their rules are being stronger at shooting or better at shooting or things like that. And oftentimes that doesn't matter, because if they're shooting my orc stuff, they're going to die anyway. So I'm able to really simplify things down for the other armies, other factions, down to the things that are actually going to be impacting me over the course of the game. Focus on those, and then keep only the important things in my head and at any given time. And when you're able to abstract away a lot of these, especially when it comes to these more complicated armies with things like, say, GSC or like Hypercrypt and stuff like that, then you are able to really kind of focus on your own gameplay without being overwhelmed by the opponent's rules.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and it gives you some confidence to act on the table, because you kind of have an idea of what they're going for and what they're capable of. And I find I always do best when I'm playing against an army I know intimately, because I also have played it. And I can only imagine having such a diverse array of styles that you play has only magnified that advantage. But I want to transition a little bit more to the orcs part of this conversation.
If you are listening to this, it probably means you play Warhammer 40k. And if you're playing Warhammer, you know you need a lot of dice. Baron of Dice is where we get our dice from. They produce amazing different kinds of dice. We just recently got all kinds of different faction dice shipped to us, which we use on our stream games. But not only do they look really cool, but they're highly customizable. You can get different symbols, corners that are square, corners that are round, different shapes and sizes, different sided dice. It's all the rage. And they're customizable in color and design as well. They are so cool looking. Not only that, but they feel great to roll in your hands. I've never held dice that roll and feel this good. Not only that, but they are scientifically perfectly balanced. There are tons of case studies on people rolling thousands of dice and recording all the results that they get. And sometimes you might get a die that rolls just a few too many ones. We've all had to throw it out before. These dice are not like that. They are perfectly balanced to a T, thousands of rolls, perfect distribution. If you want to take your Warhammer game seriously and make sure the dice are not screwing you over, get some Baron of dice.
Brian, let's talk about the orc list you actually took to LGT. Like, just read it out top to bottom if you could.
Yeah, so the list I took to LGT was a Warhorde list. The Warhorde list is the index detachment, pretty much. There's a couple small changes, but for the most part, it's the same as what it was. So it kind of gives you the sustained hits and a couple really good strats. I started my list off with Ghazghkull Thraka, because you can't lead a mob without the boss himself as my warlord. And then I have a Beastboss, two big mechs, who both have drillas and tractoblastas. And then one of them has the enhancement Follow Me Lads, which is the +2 move. And then I have 3 war bosses with attack squigs and power claws, and one of them has the enhancement for Kunnin and Brutal, which allows you to fall back and charge. I have a 10-man unit of Beast Snagga Boys, 2 20-man units of Beast Snagga Boy or of regular boys with power claws, sluggers, and choppas. 2 units of 5 Burnas, where the Spanner Boy has a custom Mega Blaster. 2 units of Gretchen, 10-mans with the Run Herder. A 2-man unit of Mega Knobs to go with Ghazghkull. 2 battle wagons with a whole bunch of guns and an art case, and then 2 trucks as well. And so usually the way this would work would be the mechs would end up joining with 2 of the war bosses into each one of the boys squads, because it could have 2 characters each. The beast boss would go with the beast snaggas, and the 1 spare war boss would go with which I don't think I actually listed, which is 5 regular knobs with power claws. And then I would put 5 knobs and a burner boy squad into a truck. I would put the 2 units of 20 boys into battle wagons, and then the beast bosses would go into, or beast boys would go into the other truck.
Gotcha. So, as a person who doesn't play orcs, I find them kind of simplistic in their nature. They just call Waaagh, and then they charge you, usually turn 2, and then the game ends really soon after that, one way or the other. I'm sure there's much more to it than that, Brian. And there's also like such an array of data sheets you have to choose from to put it all together to make the Waaagh turn and all that happen in the way you want it to. And there's so many subtle choices that I can't even begin to understand like why you've done what you've done here. So I'll just give it to you. Like, tell me in your words how this army works and why you took what you took.
Yeah, so orcs are an army which when you compare it to it's an archetype called pressure, which likes to try and suppress your opponent's score at the cost of material. So you spend material to reduce their early game scoring on things like primary and secondaries and stuff like that, and then you hope that when in the end you might not have an army, but they're not going to have a score that's sufficient to beat you. And so orcs fit into that category of armies, at least the way that I'm playing them. And unlike other versions of pressure, like say World Eaters, which could oftentimes maybe try and wolfpack down a section of the board, they're not really going for this big knockout blow. Orcs, by the nature of their army rule, Waaagh, giving you advance and charge and the extra strength attacks and invuln save, want to have this massive turn where they just kill as much of the opponent as possible, cause as much chaos as possible, and then force your opponent to be in a spot to kind of dig out. So on the surface, it looks like I could draw that battle plan with a crayon on a piece of paper. Or
it sounds like it. Right? Call Waaagh charge
arrow.
Profit.
Yeah, draw arrow towards deployment zone, right? But in execution, it actually is a little more complicated than that. A lot of this, there's a couple skill checks in the army, and then the most important one being knowing the right time to call the Waaagh. You need to make sure that it's an opportunity where your opponent, you're going to be able to activate most of your army in the same turn. You need to know how far you think your guys are going to be going, because it's advanced rolls, how much damage you're going to be doing to each of the things that you want to fight. It's you want to be able to engineer scenarios where you can tag things that will reduce their shooting the following turn. I've noticed that one thing I've noticed for newer orc players is they have a tendency to charge the Waaagh in, have their one unit kill the opponent's one unit, and that can be good. But if your unit runs in and kills the unit and then tags two other units so that they can't then activate and shoot you next turn, that's much, much better. And so another one of the skill caps comes in when you are looking at how you charge. So charging is one of those things where it's you're able to do some what people like to call janky things with respect to how you execute it. Generally, kind of on 1,000-foot view is you need to base the opposing models with everybody who can base them, and then anybody else who doesn't just has to end closer to the original charge target than they originally started. What that means is you can do what I like to call closing the door. And so with this giant 20-man unit, you can do something like, and you watched the War Games live stream, I did this against the Necron player I played against in round 5, where I had a 20-man boys unit charge the Tesseract Vault. I put about 3 or 4 guys that were necessary to actually base the Tesseract Vault, because it's just the base itself. And then the rest of them, you on an 11-inch charge, swung around and hit a unit which was maybe like 13 inches, 14 inches away from them. And then when they piled in, we're able to pile in and fight that unit, kill that unit, tag a monolith, kind of pin his whole army into place for the next turn while standing on his own objective and giving him 0 primary. And I could have discharged that 20-man brick into the Tesseract Vault and probably not killed it, to be honest, but it would have at least done a bunch of damage. But that was a much more effective way of kind of resolving the charge, was using them as a resource, not necessarily to kill stuff. I think all I actually ended up killing was 5 mortals, but instead to dictate the tempo and the pace of the game in a way that's going to allow me control over it as the game pans out.
I love that description. I think it's really accurate, right? Like on the surface level, the macro strategy is just like charge them and then win the game through the results of that big Waaagh charge where you not deal a knockout blow to your opponent. And short of that, you've pinned them back, created all this chaos, as you put it. It just orcs everywhere, all over the table on the objectives, and they have to figure out how to navigate out of it, even if they can. And it creates a lot of room for them to make mistakes and also for you to exploit mispositions or just opportunity with big charge rolls like you just showed, where you can then leverage great player skill and foundations in competitive like combat 40K, where you can then close the door, as you put it, or wrap and trap people, all kinds of stuff you can do in the combat phase. So there's a couple follow-up questions I have that spring off of that. The choices for units you've taken here, is there I mean, they kind of make sense, right? In the sense of the macro strategies to charge them. We have 20-man boy units, we have knobs, we've got war bosses, like all that stuff is good at charging them. But we're omitting things like kill rigs and squig hogs, and the orcs have a wide array of data sheets. Even flash kits are really popular. You don't really have those. Instead, you've gone for just this brutal beatdown of specific data sheets and some characters that don't see often, like big mechs. Can you just describe why you took the units you took a little bit?
Yeah. So for Warhorde, the army has sustained hits, one, and they have a stratagem, which is exploding hits on fives, or critical hits rather on fives. Ghazghkull has an ability which says that in the Waaagh turn, all orc units within 12 inches get lethal hits. That combos with that strat to make it so that a 20-man boy unit rolling 80 attacks can have lethal exploding hits on fives, and that unit is going to kill almost everything in the game, usually multiple things in the game. And so that alone is the reason I included Ghazghkull. You know, I've definitely told a couple of people over the weekend that if Makari was by himself and cost 150 points, I would probably take him.
Love Makari. Makari is my spirit animal, and I'm so glad that he's getting the star shine he deserves.
Yeah, he's so good. And Ghazghkull's damage profile is also really well positioned. You know, he also gets the exploding fives. He's damage 4. AP3 with lots of attacks. You know, he's also really strong. The knob unit and the beast snagas are just really effective, really powerful units for their for the points cost. And then the main kind of damage dealers are these 20-man boys units. You add the war boss because war bosses are just good value. They have lots of attacks in the Waaagh, and then they also have +1 to hit in the Waaagh as well, or sorry, in general. And because they have +1 to hit, that means that all your boys go from hitting on 3s to hitting on 2s, which is a really great efficiency boost for this army. The big, if you will, tech piece that I've added, which I haven't been seeing too much around, is the Big Mech. So the Big Mech has an ability, has a number of abilities. One is reroll 1s to hit, so those slugga pistols, you know, are really effective. And then he's got a cool AP3 damage 3 weapon and Drilla, and then he has a gun, which is okay. He lets you reroll advances, which is a powerful ability. And then the main one is that he gets to run when you move the unit that he's with. They get to move with a normal advance or fallback move. They got to go through models and terrain as if they weren't there, and that's a really important rule for you know, how orcs want to function.
Right, not getting move blocked is like a big problem for orcs.
100%, yeah. So, I mean, generally the thought process here is if I get to activate my entire army in a meaningful way into your army, being the opponent, I'm probably going to win the game. The Waaagh turn is that effective, it's that strong, right? So the most effective strategies to stop that is preventing those activations, doing things like move blocks and blocking me from using everything in the same turn to hit as much of yours as possible. So by adding a Big Mech, I'm taking away a significant component of your ability to do that by move blocking me, because move blocking is actually one of the hardest things to properly do in the game against a melee army, because of how abstract a lot of these movement lines can be for charges. And one of the best ways to achieve it in a way that is sustainable and correct is to do it extremely close to your opponent, right? And make it so that they have to go around you because they don't have any choice but to. The further away you get from the opponent, the more options and directions and abstract movement lines can get in order to achieve what they want. And so the Big Mech making it so that they have to now pull back quite a bit because I can advance with a reroll in the Waaagh turn and have the +2 advance from the strat and just kind of jump over their move block and screen, means that they have to be quite far back, which means that actually properly executing the move block is quite difficult.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, there's so many different angles you can come at this, and now that you can go over the models, you can't just like, I've simply put some Seraphim in front of your battle wagon. The boys can't really get out and charge me. No, you're not safe at all. And with rerolling that advance roll, I didn't even catch that little nifty part of it. You really get a lot of value in terms of just like, you're probably not going to roll a bad advance roll. And that on the Waaagh turn can be crippling, right? Like you don't have a reroll outside of a CP for that, so you really need to make it count.
Yeah, I rolled a lot of ones on advances into sixes over the course of the season.
Oh man, that's
That was,
backbreaking.
yeah.
The Big Mech's tech. I never even thought of that. I mean, the Big Mech is like, I think of him as like the guy who walks around with the mechs and, really doesn't do what the orcs are trying to do. But he can join with the War Boss. They can have two characters like that.
Yeah, when you have a large boy unit, 20 men, you're able to add 2 leaders to the unit, which is quite strong. You see this a lot in Green Tide with War Bosses and Pain Boys.
Right.
I did the same thing just with the Mech Boys.
That makes a lot of sense. I always thought it was like the Pain Boys are like the lower tier of characters, what kind of enabled that. But interesting, good stuff. So what about the rest of the data sheets, right? Like the battle wagons for the 20 boys, and then the gas combo makes that package all make sense. The Big Mechs help it, the War Bosses help it. Then you have like a lot of random like oddball choices, like 5 knobs, 5 burning boys. What's going on here with these like tech pieces?
Yeah, actually, I think just real fast, I want to talk about the battle wagons because I think that they're a really important part of this. Because
Oh
while
yeah,
the Big Macs are good, if you were in a smaller transport, like or even a battle wagon without a death roll, your opponent could still try and charge you to wrap you. But because of the fact that battle wagons have outside of the Waaagh 9 attacks with AP and multi damage, except for the Wrecking Ball, which is no AP, but still multi damage. It means that they can't really charge you and move block you in an effective way by doing that. So that does yet another level of, you have to move block me from far away, which is exactly what I want. I want board control, and the battle wagons feed into that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So basically, it's not only like the battle wagons do this board control and protection for your boys, but they're also themselves are like combat elements after the Waaagh turn. Like they're very hard after dealing with the Waaagh turn to then deal with a few battle wagons rolling around.
Yeah, oftentimes I've found in games that go past where my battle wagons are alive after I've declared Waaagh and like moved, had my Waaagh turn, that they're functionally immortal because your opponent just doesn't have the resources or material to deal with them while they're dealing with the rest of your army and also trying to catch up on score.
Right. So with that said, what happens if actually now we've entered the battle wagons. Let's talk about the rest of the data sheets, like the burners and the knobs and all that stuff.
Yeah, so my list was 1,990 points. Burner Boys are 60 points. Storm Boys are 65. So I made a very conscious choice to take Burner Boys instead of Storm Boys here. And my rationale for this was a couple levels. So first off, I found that anytime you're doing actions, and oftentimes when you're doing actions in Pariah, you're happy to do them on the board edge anyway, because you either want to be skirting away from enemy retaliation, so you can have the unit again, or the action itself requires you to be there, such as like containment or something like that. So because of that meant that Strat Reserve is perfectly fine over Deep Strike, and that played out well over the tournament. But I wanted a unit which would be effective even outside of that. And so the Burner Boys, to me, are a unit which allows me to do some actual damage in the shooting phase against chaff units, which again is the main way that your opponent stops you from playing the game that you want to play, because I want to play the Warhammer the way I want to. I don't want my opponent to have any agency in deciding how the game's going to be played. And so the Burner Boys feed into you. Yeah. So one of my practice games, I think, against Nas in the lead up to the event, kind of demonstrated this, I think, really well. And he went first. He put a Chimera full of guardsmen on the middle objective. And so I was kind of now in a position where I wanted to stage behind a wall, and he was going to then dump out a bunch of guardsmen and block a lot of stuff. He might not have blocked the 120-man unit, but he's going to block the most of the rest of my components of my army. But I was able to take the Burner Boys, disembark them from the transport, advance them onto the middle objective to contest it, and then also make it so that if he ever got those infantry out, I'd have an Overwatch, which could credibly remove most of them, and then stop that move block from happening.
Wow. So it's actually like a preemptive move block counter for that Overwatch. And 5 burners is enough for that? You don't need like a 10-man or something to really guarantee it?
Because of the fact that their datasheet rules is pretty good. So you have the 46 shots, and then if you're within 6 inches of the target, you get a reroll ones. If they're on objective, you get full rerolls. So 46 shots, strength 4, no cover with full rerolls is usually pretty good. It's not going to work against Marines, but Marines don't have a way to move block you in the way that would be particularly effective at doing it. It's good against, I think, and good enough against the armies that want to exercise that tactic. Things like GSC or Guardsmen, or even sister squads. You're not going to kill the entire sister squad, but you're going to kill enough where the move block gets opened up, then you can go around it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Okay, so the burners counted the move blocks, and I'll just hit hard with power claws, is what I'm seeing.
Yeah, the knobs are just a really nice, effective trading piece. They're able to usually run off and control like an expansion objective or threaten expansion. They'll kill most things. 5-man knob units tend to trade up quite well. Generally, I found that 5-man knob units kill everything that 10-man knob units kill, and the things that 10-mans might kill over a 5-man is not enough to really warrant it. It's so few and far between.
Right. When it comes to the Beastnaga boys in the truck, it's just interesting to me that's like a one of, I feel like when you're just taking a unit as a one of, it's kind of hard to apply it as a melee unit. You want like redundancy there. And I see a lot of those like 5 knob one ofs, Beastnaga boys, War Boss one of. What's the thought here?
They all have really useful applications in the meta. So, for example, against Gettin, the Beastboss with the Snagas are really quite effective. Against vehicles in general, they're also quite effective. I wanted to have things. I wanted to have some toolbox units that I can in my army, which can help me solve problems that might come up over the course of the game. And oftentimes, I found that I would ingress the Beastboss and Beast Snagas in the truck to apply them into a place of the board where I'm going to need some more resources once my opponent decided where we'd fight the battle.
Wow, I never even thought about orcs ingressing at all. I'm like, my brutish brain that doesn't understand orcs is like, they just run straight forward. Like, why would they bother spending time and effort and energy on reserves? But it's angle attacks, I suppose.
Yeah, well, a lot of times, another one of the effective strategies that people use against orcs is they try to focus on a section of the board and let orcs control another one, and then they move on to that section to try and then start to slowly catch up. And so what that usually ends up playing out for orcs is that they end up having a weak side and a strong side, and then their strong side tends to overwhelm your resources if you try and attack the entire board. So by having a reserve unit of boys, I am then able to respond to where they decide the battle is going to happen, the strong side, with an additional resource, which then makes it so that it takes them even longer to dig out of that particular side of the board, so that my advantage over the course of the rest of the space is maintained.
Yeah, basically you just got that big old board control. Now, one thing I've noticed about the orc army is that it's pretty large, right? Like battle wagons are big profile tanks. 20 boys are it's a big unit. Like hiding is definitely doable with these modern boards having terrain all over the place, but it's not easy. And against like fast shooting armies, they can still get line of sight to you. Going second can be very brutal also in terms of Waaagh timing. One part, this is a 2-part question, I guess. Like, one, how do you just handle getting shot, if not just take it on the face? And 2, how do you time your Waaghs, I guess, going first and going second, and how that impacts it?
Yeah, so I mean, I always like to say battle wagons are here for a good time, not a long time. So you just deploy them on the line. They either get to play Warhammer or they get to be safe. They have built-in AOC, they have cover save. Against las cannons, they're taking 4-ups. They got T12. Like, they're actually quite difficult to kill properly.
Right.
And the important thing you really want to do is you're not hiding the wagon. You're hiding where the guys that come out of the wagon are going to be able to land. You want to make it so that if your opponent wants to shoot the contents of what comes out, then they're going to have to be in a really aggressive position where they get jumped by the rest of your army, right? And then they can't afford to be that aggressive. And so then if they kill the wagon, your guys are still in a really aggressive stage position. You lost a couple to coming out of the destroyed transport, but you're not. The wagon is not how you're going to be, winning the game. The wagon is a way to reduce the footprint, get some speed, and get you so your opponent is forced to commit a lot to try and remove it.
I like it. So it's almost like bait in a sense, but if you don't fall for the bait, it will just drive at you.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can see, like, against the Necron game I played, I'm pretty sure I looked at the board for a couple minutes, and then I said I was just going to disrespect the crap out of him, and then I just jammed the battle wagons down his face. And he did kill one of my 20-mans, but the other one was sat in the middle of the board with a 20-man unit on the middle objective, and then the following turn I was in his deployment zone with boys.
So how do you time the Waaagh? Because you said that's like one of the biggest skill checks with the army, and for me it's like they're probably going to call the Waaagh turn 2, and if they don't, it's definitely going to be turn 3, but I'm sure there's more nuance to that decision on your end. So how do you know?
Well, first off, I went second 7 out of 9 times in the tournament.
Orcs hate going second, Brian. I don't know if anyone told you.
I didn't love it, but I think that it becomes a lot about, you have to understand what your distances you're likely to travel are. You have to understand how much you're going to be able to hit, how much they're going to be able to hit back with, right? Those two questions are the most important things. Where is your army going to end up, and then how much of their army is going to be able to activate into the following turn? And if they reserves, there's that component of trying to screen things out and stuff like that as well. Whether or not you activate the Waaagh, a lot of times it is very obvious, right? You're just like, this is it, we're going for it. But oftentimes, the longer you hold the Waaagh, the more powerful it can become if you're not losing material while you're holding that Waaagh back. Because your opponent has to respect it over the course of the entire game. Once you've used it, obviously it becomes much easier for your opponent to play around the rest of your forces, because orcs are not particularly tough outside of a couple units and outside of the Waaagh turn. So you're really kind of focused on just making sure that when if you can have a super effective Waaagh turn where you're going to be hitting most of his army, tying up most of his stuff, it's a great time to call it no brainer, go for it. But if you are only going to be able to activate with a portion of your army, it's almost always correct to just wait. You just want to hold it for as long as possible.
Yeah, I think a lot of orc players just Waaagh at the first decent opportunity, but rather you're kind of viewing it as this is my last resort type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, if my opponent thinks they're far enough away, but they're not actually far enough away because of, again, these abstract charging angles and lines and stuff like that, then I'll go for it, right? So it's coming down to looking and seeing, has my opponent made a mistake? And if they have, I'll take advantage of it. And if they haven't, then let's just keep waiting until they do.
What is your risk tolerance level with calling the Waaagh? Like, at some point you have to get out of your transport, roll an advance roll a charge roll, hope it works. And you have rerolls, you have CP, but that's no guarantee. So, like, are you banking the farm on 8s, on 7s, on 9s, on 6s? Like, where do you feel, especially because there's 2 rolls here, right? Like,
yeah, I get nervous if I have a charge more than 3 inches.
I'm the same way, dude. I asked the same question to Anthony with his world eaters, and he literally said, if it's an 8, I'm 100% taking it.
Anthony's a psychopath, all right?
He really is. He really is.
He's a maniac. I don't understand.
100% of the time takes 8s. I'm like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. It's always going to be a risk versus reward thing. If I am going to look for opportunities where I can have as short as a charge as possible, and if I have to have a charge that's like 6 or 7 inches, I only want one of them. I want to make sure I have a CP for it. You just try and mitigate it as best as possible. Sometimes you can also engineer scenarios where it's like, okay, I'm going to make this charge, then he's going to heroic, then he's going to make this charge shorter. So think about the sequencing of how things go and how the whole rest of the turn and all the movements that's going to happen in that turn plays out. Can be helpful in that space. But generally speaking, you're looking at it as I move back distance and I have to roll this on 3D, so some number on 3d6 between the advance and the charge. You just try and make it as close as possible. That's why I tend to be quite aggressive with these battle wagons. I want that.
It'll help you later, right? I just got one more question, Brian. I'm really excited to talk about your actual games on the table, because I think so much of the nuance and the decision making is hard to describe accurately in just concept. I really want to get into the actual decisions you found yourself making in the moments of the tournament. That's going to be in part 2, folks. But before we get there, Brian, I got one more question for you. If you had one more piece of advice to give an aspiring Warhammer player, what would it be?
I would say probably the best thing you can do after any game is ask yourself, what could you have done better? Anytime you lose, if you lose because you had a really bad dice roll or because you failed some critical charge roll, yes, that contributed to losing the game in the moment, but the reality is that you made a series of decisions that made that charge roll important and the deciding factor in you winning the game or not. 99 times out of 100, there's other decisions you could have taken, which would have made it so that roll was not either much more likely to happen or not necessary at all. And so, looking back and not blaming dice and rather being kind of critical and self-analytical on what you could have done better, is, I think, the number one way to get better and improve at the game is kind of that self-analysis. And asking your opponents for feedback too in that space helps. Sometimes it's hard in the moment, but certainly if you ever have the opportunity, it's a great way.
Yeah, that's that moment of self-reflection. And it can be, if not right after the game, like a day later, when you have a clear head to think about it and try to review yourself from the dice. Couldn't agree more. That's a huge step in the getting better process. Brian, thanks so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. We really enjoyed having you, and I'm really glad to hear there is more Kunnin than Brutal tactics on the orc side of things. I'm really excited to hear about your actual games played at the LGT. We're going to talk about that in part 2 of this podcast, folks. You can find that on patreon.com/AOW40K. You'll get access to 260 plus other episodes of this show and our amazing Discord server where we talk about all things competitive Warhammer, and it's not trolly, not rude. It's a nice Discord server. So if you are interested in learning the game, become your best, do yourself a favor, support the show, and subscribe. Patreon.com/AOW40K.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. The Art of War 40K.com.